Hello and welcome to another episode of Weapons and Warfare. For Straight Arrow News, I'm your host, Ryan Robertson. Just ahead on this week's episode, even as the calendar turns to a new year, previous problems from last year still loom large for our military leadership. This week, hear from a panel of four-star generals on the dangers Americans face as 2024 turns into 2025. Plus, leaning on artificial intelligence to provide a virtual dome of protection for troops on the ground. See why Axon Vision's AI-driven counter-UAV technology is our weapon of the week. But first, here are some headlines you may have missed. Talk about ending the year with a bang. On December 31st, guided missile destroyers from the U.S. Navy's Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group launched Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles at Iranian-backed Houthi command and control, weapon production, and storage facilities in Yemen. The strikes all happened in U.S. Central Command's area of responsibility in the Red Sea. The DoD said the strikes were a response to escalating Houthi threats in the region, including attacks on shipping routes and allies. Those officials said the operation highlights the U.S. commitment to maintaining stability and protecting international maritime lanes from disruptions caused by Houthi-aligned forces. The U.S. Marine Corps Commandant is warning Congress's inability to pass a defense budget means the Corps will end the fiscal year undermanned. Speaking at the Reagan National Security Forum earlier this month, General Eric Smith talked about the damage another continuing resolution would have on the Marines' reenlistment efforts.
We have Marines who have stepped up to reenlist. We've offered them bonuses to reenlist. They've said, okay, we're in. We're going to reenlist for 4 years, and they expect to have that promise completed. Their families expect to have that promise completed. And when it's not, then they tend to look elsewhere. And the one thing that we can't buy back is manpower.
General Smith went on to say that number could eventually mean the loss of 3,000 to 4,000 Marines. That's the equivalent of an infantry regiment. The current continuing resolution expires March 31st. The last time Congress completed the appropriations process on time was 1996. When 12 Monkeys and Toy Story were still in theaters. Staying in D.C., earlier this month, President Biden bestowed the Medal of Honor posthumously to 6 men and 1 living recipient during a White House ceremony. 5 of the honorees were recognized for their efforts in the Korean War and 2 for their actions in the Vietnam War, including the only living recipient, Army Specialist 4th Class Kenneth David.
Heroes of different ranks, different positions, and even different generations. But heroes who all went above and beyond the call of duty. Heroes who all deserve our nation's highest and oldest military recognition, the Medal of Honor.
Army General Richard Cavazos, Corporal Fred McGee, Private First Class Wataru Nakamura, PFC Charles Johnson, and Private Bruno Orig were posthumously honored for their heroic actions during the Korean War, while the late Captain Hugh Nelson Jr. was recognized with Specialist David for their heroic actions during the Vietnam War. For many of us, a new year can feel like a new start, a reset on the things we can control. And while that's true for some things, the hard fact is many of the problems that existed in 2024 will most likely remain as we start another trip around the sun. That's particularly true for our national defense, especially as each branch of the DoD works to modernize its forces. During the AFA Airspace and Cyber Conference last fall, the commanders of NORAD, U.S. Cyber Command, U.S. Space Command, and U.S. Transportation Command gathered to talk about some of the dangers we currently face. And that's the subject of this week's debrief. As 2025 begins, America's national defense faces an array of evolving threats. from rising tensions with China and Russia to the challenges posed by non-state actors. There's no shortage of problems. As the commander of NORAD, General Greg Gayo explains, these once regional threats are now global concerns.
What we face today is a variety of threats in all domains from multiple adversaries and from all avenues of approach, not just from the north. And these threats can threaten us from much further away than, even just a couple of years ago.
It's that kind of reach that has the attention of former U.S. transportation boss, the newly retired General Jackie Van Ovost, who cites cyber vulnerabilities both home and abroad.
What we're talking about is winning without fighting. Sound familiar? They're doing that every day. And then finally, we talk about the long-range threat. The long-range threat to mobility missions specifically designed to touch us. And these are the risks we see playing out today on an active basis around the globe.
As far as who stands as America's biggest threats across all spectrums, the panel was very pointed in their assessment of the People's Republic of China. Not only is the PRC heavily invested in a military buildup, they are intensely focused on cyber warfare. General Timothy Ha is the commander of U.S. Cyber Command. He says the PRC is conducting a multi-pronged offensive.
We want to expose this threat. First is where PRC has been targeting the intellectual property of our industry, which is really the foundation of our economy and the underpinnings of our department's security. Also, how they look at over time, the critical infrastructure of the United States. We've exposed how they target our critical infrastructure and what that means for us as a nation, that we have a competitor that is willing to use those type of tactics to target not only the department, but our citizens.
And those are just the threats here on terra firma. As U.S. Space Command's top boss, General Stephen Whiting, explains, the U.S. is also working to defend the nation from threats that may not necessarily be land-based, as both China and Russia continue to work on ways to disrupt America's space-based communication system. And they aren't stopping there.
The PRC in particular has gone to space for the same advantages that we have, not because it's cool. I mean, it is, but that is not why they've gone to space. It's to give themselves the ability to operate on ocean-wide, on continental-wide, on global scales. And so they have gone to space to enable their Air Force, their Army, their Navy, their Marine Corps to be more precise, more lethal, and more far-ranging. And we've got to deal with that fact to make sure that we help protect the joint force from the space-enabled attack of others.
Another area of growing concern for U.S. military leadership, the Arctic. Russia and China are working together like they never have before, and that demands America's attention. In fact, the two adversaries even exercised together in the Bering Strait in the summer of 2023.
But it shows on a daily basis that the Arctic is an area where a number of nations are showing interest, not only for military purposes, but also for scientific purposes. And it takes up 52% of our AOR, so we spend a lot of time looking at that. How we're adapting to that is pursuing sensors that go from sea floor all the way up to space in multiple layers and domains to make sure that we can detect all of those adversaries, not at the ranges that we did 5-10 years ago, but much further away because of the increased complexity and capability of their weapons.
A capability that the generals pointed out will only continue to grow. And while those charged with defending the U.S. may not have all the answers they're looking for yet, they do say they think they're on the right track. And they acknowledge prioritizing investments in secure communications and accelerating the adoption of artificial intelligence within U.S. Cyber Command and its components will enhance both cybersecurity and their ability to respond to AI-enabled cyber attacks.
Serving you clarity through context, our mission at SAN is to deliver the news straight down the middle. We're different from mainstream media because we spotlight distorted headlines and show you how to do it too. Discover stories that right and left-leaning outlets are choosing not to cover by using our Media Mist tool. Download the SAN app and turn on notifications to have straight facts delivered right to your phone or tablet, and get straight facts anytime at SAN.com.
Spend almost any time on social media, and it's easy to find examples of Ukrainian drones inflicting damage on Russian troops and equipment. Less visible, however, are examples of counter-drone efforts, and there's a few reasons for this. Mainly, the technology isn't as advanced as the offensive side of the equation, but people are working on this very issue. That's why Axon Vision and their UAV counter AI is our weapon of the week. Axon Vision's co-founder and CTO, Ido Rosenberg, sees the problem facing ground troops in modern combat very clearly when it comes to drone warfare.
Because what it is called loitering ammunition is basically a fixed-wing or quadcopter drone that is used as kind of like a guided missile. But unlike those kind of missiles, they're flying very slow and low, meaning they're under the radar dome. So that's why most militaries have a lot of issues with this type of loitering ammunition.
Simply put, modern air defenses weren't built to defend against a threat that could be as small as a shoebox. That's where Axon Vision's AI-based counter-defense systems come in, using a suite of sensors to automatically detect, track, and classify targets to protect the battle space.
So what we've built kind of an optical radar that's using thermal imagers and day cameras to pick up those drones when they're getting really close. So we're kind of in the domain of personal protection or tactical protection of counter-UAS, and not with a very long range, but for the maneuvering forces for armed vehicles and systems that you can spread out in the field.
Rosenberg tells us Axon Vision's tech is already in use in Israel and can be fitted for use in whatever weapon station the end user wants.
So our system called Edge RCWS can connect to every remote weapon station, can be for automated assault rifle up to 120 millimeter main battle tank cannon. So it can connect to any different type of remote weapon station.
It's a good example of the kind of innovation American military leadership says it's looking for to modernize and prepare for any future conflicts, something Rosenberg alluded to during our visit.
So we have been hearing for the past kind of year or so that kind of the U.S. has kind of figured out, hey, maybe we can be in active conflict very soon. It's a matter of literally a decision being made and signed. So they kind of figure out that most of their kind of long-range programs are not going to be sufficient for the next kind of conflict. So we're hearing a lot kind of deep hunger of them saying, hey, if it's working somewhere, just bring it here, Americanize it, and we'll put it on our systems.
Rosenberg says dealing with threats often comes down to split-second decisions, and their AI is built to provide the kind of detection, decision-making, and action that keeps operators in the fight with an unfair advantage. The delivery of American-made, European-donated F-16s to Ukraine recently saw some new developments. It's a story we've been following from the start here at Weapons and Warfare, and it's a subject of this week's Comms Check. In early December, Ukraine took delivery of a second batch of F-16s from Denmark. On the surface, that would seem to be a good thing, but a closer look reveals they still have just a handful of pilots trained to fly the fourth-gen fighters. To fix the problem, Ukraine's government recently announced it's cutting training time by 3 months so new F-16 pilots can fill cockpits faster. President Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine has dozens of seasoned combat pilots ready to receive cross-training in the American fighter. Still, only a few of them can be trained at a time because almost all F-16 fighter transition training slots are filled by American pilots and American allies. While those slots are at a premium, the biggest issue for Ukraine seems to be a shortage of pilots proficient enough in the English language to understand their training. It's an ongoing problem hindering the training of more Ukrainian airmen. Outgoing National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan alluded to the issue at the Reagan National Defense Forum in December.
We've had a limited number of pilots trained, not because we're not prepared to train them, we are, as many as possible, but because the Ukrainians do not have the pilots to be able to build a full F-16 capability in time.
While those comments seem to be at odds with Ukrainian officials, the fact remains the F-16 operates in English, and a lack of fluency slows a pilot's ability to get the most out of the aircraft. As for what's next, stay tuned.
All opinions expressed in this segment are solely the opinions of the contributors.
All right, folks, that's going to just about do it for us this week on Weapons in Warfare. Want to remind you all to please like and subscribe to all our social media feeds. And if you want to talk to someone here at the show, you can. Our email is weaponsandwarfare@san.com. Okay, for this week's wrap, I want to talk a little bit about the importance of getting the right people for the right jobs. Over the course of this week and next, and maybe longer, President-elect Trump's cabinet picks are going through the confirmation process. Among them, Pete Hegseth for Secretary of Defense and Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence. They both come with some serious baggage, and I don't have time to go into everything, but that baggage may ultimately prevent them from serving on Trump's cabinet. Let's start with Pete Hegseth. Beyond the accusations of philandering and excessive drinking, which he promises to stop if confirmed, the man just doesn't have a resume on the same level as really any SecDef before him. Yes, he was a major and served overseas, and I admire his passion for wanting to make the U.S. military into a more lethal fighting force. But facts are facts. The highest rank he achieved in the military was that of a major. The most soldiers a major would command in the Army would be a battalion, or around 1,000. The Pentagon employs more than 2 million people. That's leadership on another level, and it's not really clear how much budget experience he got hosting the weekend morning show on Fox News. Then there's Tulsi Gabbard, the one-time Democrat who also is a staunch defender of Bashar al-Assad, the brutal dictator and Putin puppet who used chemical weapons on his own people, among the other atrocities he committed. While I wouldn't go so far as to call Gabbard compromised like some in Congress have, she does have a tendency to use the same lines as Russian propagandists. She also falls hard for internet conspiracy theories, and while she's not the only politician or media figure to do so, I'd prefer it if the head of U.S. national intelligence didn't. Look, I understand the appeal President Trump has to his supporters. He bucks trends. He doesn't play by the established rules. And after decades of stagnant leadership in D.C., I understand. In fact, maybe I overstand. But we were told by President Trump the American people deserve to have the best running the most important organizations. So when it comes to Pete Hegseth and Tulsi Gabbard, let's just say, President Trump, I think you can find better picks. For senior producer Brett Baker, video editor Brian Spencer, and graphics artist Dakota Patillo, I'm Ryan Robertson with Straight Arrow News, signing off.